I'm Tariq Mitri, the director of Paris Institute for Public Policy and International Affairs, and I'm very pleased to welcome you all in our institute and wish you fruitful, intelligent, forward-looking deliberations. I would like to commend Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for persevering in the study of ISIS at a time where the so-called defeat of Daesh after the fall of Mosul and Raqqa has visibly contributed to the waning of political and intellectual interest in ISIS. There was a time where not just the military operations, but the political and intellectual endeavors had proliferated. There was not a day where there was a conference. There was not a conference on ISIS. Books and articles and mushroomed all over, and there was an overarching policy for the region that was largely conditioned, if not determined exclusively, by the fight against ISIS. This has changed. Let us hope. I'm the one who hopes, among those who hope that the post-defeat of ISIS, we'll see how irreversible is this defeat. You will tell us how irreversible it is. But we will see is if the post-defeat would lead to a change in the subject matters we study, in the approach to ISIS that needs to be revised, and in the policies. The military battle against ISIS and the ideological battle as well had obscured in the past everything else, gave little space for a solid reflection on the sociological, political conditions that allowed for ISIS to expand and exert its influence far beyond that of other radical organizations in this region and beyond. And it's perhaps now time to look into those issues, as I said, with a new approach. The former approach was largely determined by the need to achieve success in confronting militarily the threat of these organizations, or with security agencies in Europe confronting the security threat of ISIS. And little was left to looking into other important issues. I'm pleased that Konrad Adenauer Stiftung is willing to engage in a not only continued reflection the way we've had it in the past, but also look for new avenues for intellectual efforts. A week ago, they were supportive of an initiative here at this institute that started and that dealt with a tribe in eastern Syria, western Iraq, and ISIS. We were attempting to understand why is it that ISIS was able, at least for a while, to rule swaths of territory where the social structure is traditional, where the tribes were not only social structures, but some sort of political or pseudo-political actors. How did those actors adjust to the rule of Daesh? And how did Daesh relate to those actors? So that's a kind of issue that could not be examined in the years that preceded the presumed defeat of Daesh. So this is an example of what might have to be done. It's an example of what is possible to do now that the concern about defeating them militarily is not so overwhelming as it was a year ago. It's also an opportunity, as I said, for us to look into the politics of savagery in relation to a number of issues that were sidelined, obscured, forgotten. The effects of foreign occupation, dictators' tyranny, social marginalization, and the divide between Sunnis and Shi'is. Part of it is reinvented for political purposes. It's not just ancestral hatred between Shi'is and Sunnis, but in a political context, specific political context, both in Iraq and other parts of the Levant, the so-called fault line between the two communities is a product of struggle over power in this region. Let's hope also that the renewed interest post the defeat of Daesh would help us look more intelligently into terms that have been used time and again indiscriminately. Islamic, Islamist, radical Muslim, Salafist, jihadi, terrorists, they were all lumped together, again in a context of military confrontation and in the context of the ideological battle. There was little taste for discernment. Now, I think the time for discernment has come, and we need to seek greater conceptual precision and contextual differentiation. One of our researchers has worked on the Sunni community in Lebanon. He's read Bernard Rougier, of course, and tried to learn as much as he could, but and found out, having interviewed many of the Salafis of Tripoli, Lebanon, that they were not receptive at all to the call of Daesh, and that moving from traditional Salafism to the radical ideology and practice of Daesh, in the case of Tripoli, is an exception rather than the rule. I've seen also French researchers who said that most of those who came and joined Daesh and fought in Syria that were not previously related to any Salafi or Salafi-like group, were not even mosque goers till the very last period of their lives. They came from elsewhere. So, I mean, all of these realities that were not sufficiently dealt with in the past perhaps should be on our agenda. I would like to wish you all the best in your deliberations and look forward to see this project continue. And thank you, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, for bringing all these experts from all over the world. We're pleased to have you all in Beirut.
Thank you. Dear Marian, dear Dr. Mitri, dear Excellencies, distinguished research community, ladies and gentlemen, please let me first thank the Isam Fares Institute and you, Tarek, for the great cooperation in organizing this event. Both our institutions enjoy a very successful partnership, and I'm very glad that we co-host this conference for the second time at the American University here in Beirut. You mentioned this just a week ago. We together held this very important workshop regarding the relationship between tribes and jihadi groups in the Middle East and North Africa. It was just a week ago when we opened this one. On behalf of Konrad Adenauer Foundation, I'm very honored to welcome you to this conference on the state of militant Islamism and Jihadism after the end of the Caliphate. In particular, I'd like to welcome to Beirut Mr. Marian Wendt, member of the Christian Democratic Party, CDU, in the German Bundestag. We are delighted to have you here with us, and we are very much looking forward to your opening address. Thank you, Marian. Beside this, I'm glad to welcome from Berlin also the Konrad Adenauer Foundation's working group on terrorism and domestic security. You're combining a one-week visit to Lebanon with attending this conference. I wish you a fruitful stay here in Lebanon. I'm delighted that outstanding researchers from Europe, the US, Africa, and Asia accepted our invitation to Beirut in order to share their expertise with us. We warmly welcome you and are very much looking forward to your insightful presentations and enriching discussions. Ladies and gentlemen, exactly 1 year ago, right here in this auditorium, we held a major conference on the future of the Islamic State and the potential impact of its back then impending military defeat in Syria and Iraq. Now, 1 year later, the situation has changed fundamentally. In fact, the Islamic State has been defeated militarily and has just lost its major strongholds in Syria and Iraq. However, the group and its extreme ideology have not been defeated. The Islamic State is undergoing a process of transformation. My organization, we, within a fact-finding mission, having visited Kirkuk just 2 weeks ago, were witness of how Daesh is transforming and what this means for the security situation over there. This is a matter of fact that the Islamic State has not been finally defeated. We are going to discuss this here. The Islamic State is undergoing a process of transformation from a quasi-state actor and service provider to a terrorist group that operates on a cell-based structure from underground again. Sectarian tension, destroyed economies, and failed states nurture the group's persistence not only in parts of the Middle East but also in Africa and Asia. The same goes for Al-Qaeda, which in recent years has experienced an unexpected, some experts might say expected, revival. While ISIL dominated the world's attention for the past couple of years, Al-Qaeda has quietly regrouped, expanded its network, and fortified its branches all over the world. Today, Al-Qaeda can again compete with ISIL in terms of influence, reach, and manpower. Both organizations, however, continue to threaten the security and stability of the state in the region and the West. Dear ladies and gentlemen, in the upcoming 2 days, 27 experts will examine the ideology, strategy, and evolution of the Islamic State, Al-Qaeda, and both their affiliates in the Middle East, Asia, and Africa. The conference will allow us to understand more profoundly the major trends in jihadism and militant Islamism around the world and provide us with valuable insights for decision makers here in the region as well as in Germany. As a German foundation affiliated with the governing CDU party of Chancellor Angela Merkel, we are keen to promote and facilitate stability and security in the Middle East and North Africa, which we see as our immediate neighborhood. With this conference, we hope to contribute to a better understanding of regional and global processes and to map the terrorist threats of the present and the future. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish you all an intellectually stimulating, rich, and fruitful event. Thank you once again for attending. Please, Marian, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Niels, dear Dr. Mitri, dear Niels, dear Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. I'm very glad to join you here in Beirut today and to open this esteemed conference on the current state and the future of militant Islamism and Jihadism here in the Middle East and worldwide. I'm very happy for the invitation, dear Mr. Behringer, and want to thank Mr. Römer, dear Niels, and his team from the CAS Syria Iraq office, as well as the ISAM Fars Institute, very much for the organization of this very promising conference. The world has grown together, and the security challenges have changed dramatically. As a representative of a young German generation, I grew up with the notion that violent conflict had vanished from the European continent. Political violence seemed distant. History, particularly German history, has taught us the critical lessons of destruction, genocide, and division. And so my generation embraced the idea of unified, free, and liberal Europe that makes our home a safe and prosperous place. But today, the enemies of the freedom and Western democracies are challenging us in a new and unprecedented way. Militant Islamism is not a distant threat anymore. Jihadists are not only destabilizing the Middle East. In fact, radical extremists are in our midst now, and now attempt to challenge our values, societies, and state institutions from within. What we face today is an adversary that cannot be fought with a conventional army alone. An enemy that does not negotiate and has shown unprecedented levels of brutality and inhumanity towards his victims. And most importantly, we deal with an enemy that has learned to quickly adapt to our fast-paced world. Just now we are facing another transformation of Islamist terrorism that I'm very eager to discuss here with you. The transformation from ISIS, from a local terrorist state project in Syria, for a transnational terror network that operates again in the underground and provinces around the world. Over the last year, the Islamic State has become one of the biggest threats that Europe has faced in its recent history, both from a security and a political point of view, but also with regard of the core values of our societies. So let me shortly elaborate 4 points on this. First of all, ISIS' capacity to establish a state-like infrastructure in the Middle East has threatened the stability of the Middle East, a region that we call our neighbor and with which we share many relations. For more than 2 years, ISIS challenged the traditional state system and redesigned the borders of the Middle East. Today it is clear that this was only possible due to the unlikely marriage of former, mostly secular Iraqi military and intelligence professionals, which once formed the backbone of a Ba'athist rule in Iraq, with radical elements in the country. It was the sectarian division of Iraq, with lingering civil war and weak Iraqi central state, that provided a virtual ground for the creation of ISIS. And it was the chaos of the Syrian civil war that offered the perfect theater for the advent of the organization from a loose insurgency to a state-like entity. It was a shock that we followed how ISIS aggraved the existing conflicts in the region, plummeting the Middle East into an unprecedented degree of instability that caused large refugee waves towards Europe, while at the same time an inhuman terrorist state was taking shape in the immediate proximity of our borders. Second, its perverse ideology. ISIS shocked us all with its brutal ideology and the cruelty it displayed on the battlefield and around the world. The Islamic State is a highly sectarian enterprise that viciously fights other religious, ethnic minorities, and Muslim communities as well. With its barbaric actions, it constitutes a direct attack on the very values that form the backbone of our societies and cultures. It was in the summer and fall 2014 that the genocide of the Yazidi community in the northern Iraq and the siege of Kurdish Kobane in Syria shocked the world and triggered many countries to intervene against this reign of terror. Among them, also the German Bundeswehr, whose engagement I will discuss in a minute. Third, ISIS challenges us with its operational sophistication and advanced terror tactics. The Islamic State brought terrorism into the age of cyber and social networks. ISIS managed to attract and recruit potential followers online, to radicalize people through the internet, and to spread fear all over the world. Pictures of beheadings, as we all remember, were transmitted into the living room of each and everyone. In this use of the propaganda, ISIS reached a new level of sophistication and won also European hearts and minds. Between January 2013 and November 2017, 960 German nationals left for Syria and Iraq in order to fight with ISIS. In all of Europe, we are speaking of approximately 6,000 persons that fought and still fight in the ranks of jihad. As I mentioned, in July 2017, ISIS lost terrorist control of much of its caliphate, and that has been exacerbated by the fall of the key cities of Raqqa and Mosul. The deteriorating situation for the group across Syria and Iraq has prompted an exodus with an estimated 5,600 foreign fighters returning to their home countries in Europe and the Western states. That's according to the Sufan Center, a US-based think tank, which says that 33 countries have reported arrivals over the past 2 years. The recovery data following the capture of major IS administrative centers, such as Raqqa, has helped identify at least 19,000 of the estimated 40,000 foreigners who joined the group from 110 countries. For there is no information regarding their fate. Russia is the top source country for ISIS fighters, with 3,500 of them joining the group. 400 have now returned home, as have 760 of Saudi Arabia's 3,200 fighters. Across the European Union, 1,214 fighters have returned out of 5,000, who flocked to war zones in the Middle East. The United Kingdom has the highest total in Europe, with 425 individuals returning home, while Germany and France have about 300. The report claims that 7 of the estimated 129 Americans who took up arms with ISIS have also returned home. The threat level posed by these returnees is difficult and assess, but countries are going to have to act quickly in order to develop strategies and share information to address it. And as a fourth point, ultimately, ISIS developed new capabilities to orchestrate and trigger terrorist activity. ISIS used the way to refugees to infiltrate Europe and to set up networks with the potential to unleash terrorist attacks on our continent. Paris, Nice, Brussels, European cities saw bloodshed in their midst. In December 2016, our own Christmas in Germany was overshadowed by an ISIS attack in Berlin. And frankly spoken, the threat is far from over. Europe, from the persons who joined ISIS in the past, approximately 330 of them have currently returned and pose a threat to our free society. German security services identified altogether 602 persons in the German jihadist scene that pose a threat to public safety. On these numbers and the instrument of protection I will elaborate in a bit. But what is crucial here is the psychological and political impact of these attacks on our continent. Fear and incitement threaten the public order and political stability. ISIS has provided the ground for populist right-wing movements to instrumentalize Islam and refugees, and to polarize our free society with racism and social division. In Germany, the AfD, the so-called Alternative für Deutschland, has abused the legitimate fears of the German population with its own propaganda and is now the third largest party in the German Bundestag. For the first time since 1945, we now have a right-wing party in our most important decision-making body. The decision for Brexit owed to a large part to fears with regard to terrorism and immigration. All these developments together constitute centrifugal forces in Europe and have not only undermined our societies, but have also severely shaken the foundation of European integration. Ladies and gentlemen, let me assess the current state of ISIS and look into the future, as we're speaking today, a future of our fight against radical Islamist terrorism. Where does ISIS stand today? How should this phenomenon be confronted? And how can we protect our free society at home? When we speak of ISIS today, one must keep in mind that only one dimension of the Islamic State has ceased to exist, and that is the state, the so-called Caliphate. Since the recapture of Mosul in July 2017 and the retaking of Raqqa in October 2017, the Islamic State has lost both its major Iraqi and its major Syrian stronghold. And in the land between, there is no significant state infrastructure left in place or governed by the Islamic State. But let me be clear, it is only the black areas that have disappeared on the maps of Syria and Iraq in recent months. But the ideology, the networks, and the propaganda tools behind them have not. In fact, we can observe now there is a transformation of ISIS from a state project to a terrorist organization that operates from the underground and in terror cells around the world. In certain regions of Syria and Iraq, ISIS operates in guerrilla-style terror cells, so-called wilayat or ISIS provinces spread throughout the Muslim world from the Philippines in the Far East to Mali in Western Africa. Libya, on Europe's southern doorstep, has become the safe haven for the Islamic State and a retreat for the higher ranks of the organization. As we have seen in the past, civil wars and state fragility provide the ground for extremists to flourish. They empower jihadist groups to operate militarily on the ground and with the tactics of terrorism around the world. Since the 1990s, war-torn Afghanistan continues to be the refuge and operational base of Al-Qaeda. After 2003, Iraq became the birthplace of various jihadist groups, most prominently IS. Today, the civil war in Syria has become the hotspot of militant Islamism. Apart from minor pockets of ISIS presence, Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups dominate the scene here. From 2001, after 9/11, Al-Qaeda has dominated the security agenda of the United States. It was the paranoia of the US administration to eliminate the terror organization that led to the intervention in Iraq in 2003. The following destabilization of Iraq provided the ground for the subsequent advent of ISIS in the 2000s. The death of Osama bin Laden in 2011 has significantly weakened Al-Qaeda. While Al-Qaeda was in a state of reorganization, ISIS dominated the jihadist scene and international agenda. Nevertheless, Al-Qaeda has since regrouped and continues to pose a significant threat to our democracies and security. Al-Qaeda-affiliated groups today dominate the scene in large parts of Syria and Yemen, as well as in Africa and Southeast Asia. The Charlie Hebdo attack was a reminder that Al-Qaeda is still able to threaten us in the West and is able to directly attack our core values such as freedom and freedom of speech. Dear ladies and gentlemen, a stable neighborhood is essential to the European and German security. It is for that reason that Germany is increasingly engaged in stabilizing the Middle East and Africa, prepared to apply a variety of foreign policy instruments at our disposal. In order to succeed against terrorism, we need to fight it on all levels, militarily, through policing and intelligence, but also by creating perspectives for local populations through economic and political opportunities. By developing counter-narratives to terrorist propaganda and ideology, and by cutting all streams of terrorist financing. In other words, we need a comprehensive approach combining the different tools at our disposal. Today, the German army is at the forefront of the international fight against terrorism in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and Mali. In Afghanistan, more than 800 German soldiers are training, advising, and assisting the Afghan security forces in their daily fight against Taliban and Al-Qaeda. In the course of the next days, the German parliament will be in discussion to continue the mission Resolute Support with 1,300 German soldiers. In Iraq, we have trained and equipped the Kurdish Peshmerga since 2014. I'm very proud that the Milan anti-tank missiles that we sent to Erbil have proven to be one of the most important game changers in stopping the advance of ISIS in northern Iraq in 2015. In Syria, we supported the efforts of the anti-Daesh coalition in their fight against ISIS with air recon assistance. It was this joint international engagement that finally eradicated the caliphate from the map. And together, With our partners, we must ensure that ISIS 2.0 will not emerge from the ash. This includes other areas as well, most prominently Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa. That is why today Germany is supporting the EU training mission and the UN peacekeeping mission MINUSMA in Mali with more than 1,200 German soldiers, our biggest foreign deployment at the moment. And besides our military means, we need to try to improve the living conditions of local population, to create economic perspectives and to strengthen statehood. Germany is one of the largest donors of humanitarian and developmental aid worldwide. We have supported Afghanistan with billions of euros since 2001, being the third largest donor just after the US and Japan. In Iraq, we are co-sharing the Task Force on Stabilization and significantly contribute to a swift reconstruction of the liberated areas. For Africa, we are currently in talks with our African partners on a Marshall Plan to further growth and stability on the continent. Let me stress this point again. Jihadist organizations flourish primarily in spaces where the state is weak and not capable of exerting control. Instability and corruption are factors that allow non-state actors to grow. It must be the centerpiece of any sustainable counter-terrorism strategy, therefore, to invest in the creation and maintenance of a stable environment and functioning state system. From a Europe and German point of view, the Middle East and North Africa lay at the doorstep. This region forms the immediate environments that directly affects our security. Instability and violence there have the potential of unleashing instability and violence at home in Germany. The refugee challenge of 2015 and 2016 has made us realize that. So it is of utmost importance, therefore, to focus on these regions to counter terrorism and Islamist extremism. Let's look at Iraq from where the Islamic State emerged in 2010. And let me outline some of Germany's basic instruments and policies towards the country. For more than a decade, Iraq has been a hotbed for terrorism. Jihadist groups flourished in the midst of a civil war and sectarian conflict. The Iraqi state in the post-Saddam era was not strong enough to effectively contain radical Islam. The political conflict between the central government in Baghdad and the Kurdish regional government weakened the entire Iraqi state. When the Islamic State emerged in its current form in 2010, it was hardly a new appearance. Similar groups and jihadist projects had already existed before, and they will reappear again if conditions will allow it. Germany is eager to prevent such development. Together with the international community, we must support and strengthen the Iraqi state to not let that happen. To that end, the German government has just recently announced it plans to enter a strategic and amplified partnership with Baghdad. In a military fight against ISIS, we supported Kurdish forces when they faced death and destruction. Now the support of Kurdish Peshmerga is set to become the parcel of a more holistic approach. The new German government, and especially my party, the Christian Democrats and the Christian Social Union, aim at a Bundeswehr mission to train and advise the Iraqi military in all parts of the country. For us, it's clear. Only a stable security apparatus can eradicate the underground network of Islamic State and facilitate long-term stability. This is why later this week, in Parliament, we will discuss to support the Iraqi forces with up to 800 soldiers. Under no circumstances shall we turn a blind eye to the developments in Iraq. Security assistance is crucial, but hardly the instruments to divert another jihadist catastrophe. Poverty leads to radicalization. Insufficient education makes extremist ideology appealing, and lacking opportunities make terrorist organization an alternative, the worst alternative. It is therefore of great importance to support the reconstruction of Iraq, to actually provide infrastructure and create opportunities. Germany allocated more than $400 million for the reconstruction of Iraq in February. Another $400 million are coming from the European Union. Besides that, 100 million of them are also German money. In total, the international community promised $30 billion in support funds dedicated primarily to the reconstruction of basic infrastructure such as schools and hospitals, but also to provide housing and humanitarian help for the many internally displaced persons. But let me be clear, this assistance, this money alone will not by itself eradicate terrorism. Internal reconciliation is crucial. Political stability is essential. And for Iraq, only a settlement between the central government and the Kurdish regional government can lead to long-term stability. It must be so in our interest to support these efforts. As a member of the Committee on Internal Affairs at the German Bundestag, I attach great importance to strategic thinking in the formulation of German interests in the Middle East. However, Germany's internal security is just as important to me, because we have a clear problem. The threat level in Germany remains high. Germany is now a firmly established target of IS, and since 2016 it has been steadily becoming an ever higher priority target. In every single Christmas market in Germany, we're talking about security strategic, we're talking about security plans defending terrorist attacks, to make one example. The current threat potential is reflected in the high volume of incoming information at the Federal Office of the Protection of the Constitution and in the high value of the tips received there. The President of the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution sees a qualitative change in the information being received there. Every individual case is examined carefully. The number of potentially violence-prone Islamists in Germany is growing steadily and will continue to increase in the future. Already today, there are almost 1,600 Islamists who are potential participants in Islamist terrorism. The Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution sees a growing threat from online terrorist recruitment. The propaganda on the internet is becoming more professional and is now being produced for specific target groups in different languages. The videos have reached a high level of quality, and radical Islamists are also focusing on making the videos entertaining. This content is spread on various platforms such as YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as through messaging services such as Telegram and WhatsApp. Access to propaganda and consumption of it have become much easier through social media. That is why a key focus of my work is strengthening the entire security architecture in Germany. Interconnectedness and exchange of information are the essential thing here. Flat hierarchies and the pooling of experts play a crucial role in this. The Joint Counterterrorism Center that was established in Berlin at the end of 2004 is not an independent agency, but rather a shared cooperation and communication platform of 40 national authorities in the area of internal security. When I mention 40 national authorities, it is important for you to know that due to our federal restructure of German state, different authorities have a variety of responsibilities in the area of security at the federal and land levels. I want to mention briefly that we have 16 different types of police forces in Germany. To me, an important lesson from Anis Amri, the terrorist attack of Berlin case, was that we need to intensify cooperation between federal and land level security authorities and to improve the exchange of information between them. No new law was necessary for the establishment of the aforementioned Joint Counterterrorism Center, because no agency received additional responsibilities or relinquished its authority. Rather, each of the participating agencies takes measure under its own responsibility and within the framework of the laws that applied to it. The organizational structure means that there is no head of Joint Counterterrorism Center. Instead, representatives of the following institutes cooperate on equal footing. Just some examples: the Federal Office for the Protection of the Constitution, the Federal Criminal Police Office, the Federal Intelligence Service, the Federal Public Prosecutor General, the Federal Police, the Central Office of the German Customs Investigation Service, the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees, the Military Counterintelligence Service, the land offices, the 16 land offices for the protection of the Constitution, and the 16 land criminal police offices. The securities in Germany must have access to the legal instruments and technological resources that are necessary for identifying radicalization tendencies and acting early enough to prevent, for example, people who are in Germany from departing to Syria. The establishment of an advice center on radicalization of the Federal Office for Migration and Refugees has been an important step forward. But prevention is just one building block in a forward-looking security architecture in Germany. In my opinion, this security architecture has three supporting pillars: personal, coordination, and legislative executive oversight. As a representative of the federal legislature, I consider investigative measures such as intelligence, video surveillance, especially at train station and other important junctures, cell site analysis, and the collection of biometric data, including fingerprints, to be indispensable. Maybe for you it seems normal, but in Germany we have very hard discussions to allow it, and it's not anymore allowed in Germany in some cases. It is hardly possible to successfully combat global Islamist terrorism single-handedly. That is why cooperation among securities agencies throughout Europe is a must. The threat level in the European Union remains as acute as ever. The large number of people who have fled to Europe represent a vast recruitment pool for radical jihadists. Even if only a small proportion of the refugees are vulnerable to such recruitment, the attacks in Würzburg and Ansbach have shown us the opportunities for exerting influence with online contacts offered by IS and the risk of subsequent radicalization that go along with this. Even before these events, the refugee crisis had shaken citizens' trust in the European Union. The attackers in Paris and Brussels did not only benefit from gaps in identity checks, but indeed seemed to have deliberately attempted to create an association in people's mind between refugee flows and terrorism in order to polarize society. This is an open and long-standing ISIS strategy. In conjunction with right-wing populist movements, the danger of terrorist organizations moving closer to achieving their ideological goals is thus particularly evident at present. The attack in Berlin fits in with this known situation. This also explains why the primary European reaction to it was an affirmation that the agenda for the developing EU counterterrorism policy with the EU has been pursuing since 2015 would continue to be adhered to. Following agreements on the main legislative projects, such as tightening the EU directives on terrorism and firearms, this agenda is now focused on expanding the existing IT architecture for internal security. In summer 2016, some 50 measures were pooled into a Council of Ministers roadmap and were accompanied by the Commission's establishment of a high-level group for information systems and interoperability. The foremost aim is the more stringent use of European data networks for criminal justice purposes and identity checks, especially to the Schengen information system, as well as easier access to databases for asylum migration management. Overall, for both third country nationals and European citizens are being checked systematically at all external borders, and police investigation procedures within the European Union are to be speeded up. In the case of the terrorist cells that carried out the attacks in Paris and Brussels, the early arrested of key members of the cell would have been more likely with such measures in place. The exchange of EU citizens' criminal files is currently decentralized. It is especially important, however, to gather the criminal files of European third-party nationals in a central location. Ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot to do. I have resumed and I have given you an overview about the things we have to do in Europe and Germany. It is therefore to stabilize Iraq and Syria, and is therefore a lot to do as homework for Europe and especially Germany. So I want to thank you, the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, and the Islam Affairs Institute for holding this conference, to give us an overview of the actual situation after the Caliphate, to help us with information how we can work together and how we can handle the problem defeating ISIS and radical Islamism in the region and in Europe. I thank you very much.